the all-in-one screen is just a TFT panel that's glued on top of the hardware that you got to take off first, then remove ribbon cables and a few other things before you can actually get to the machine itself. It's I was looking at upgrading it a little bit, but it's such old hardware that I mean I don't really want to toy with it.
So, but you've still got the dongle, haven't you?
No, I don't need the dongle because it's their proprietary hardware that has built-in dongle. So yeah.
I just want to say real quick that I apologize to anybody if I mute your mic, if I see it unmuted. I know some people are using outboard push to talks. Apologize for that, but I'm just trying to keep noise down.
There's word there could be some type of DDoS attack on Zoom right now. They're spiking red on every user on Zoom right now, it sounds like.
Yeah, there's definitely something weird going on because, like, I'm seeing things don't look like they usually do.
So in case we don't make it through the rest of the meeting, I just want to say how much I appreciate okay.
Well, the plane's not crashing, so where it's
it still looks fine here. Weather looks good.
Hashtag we're all on this together.
All right.
Don't write.
Hey everybody. Okay, hold on. We're gonna get started here. Hey everybody, this is Alex, and we are at the top of the office hours. Welcome. If this is the first time that you have come, just got a couple announcements to get started. You're probably wondering why some of you, if you're new, why you're in the participant area, and some people are in the panelist area. People that are in the panelist area tend to get here a little earlier. We open doors at 6 a.m. And then panelists kind of mosey on in between 6 and 6:40. At about 6:40 to 6:50, we do a mic check for everyone that's in the panel to make sure that they look good and sound good. So if you think you've got good audio and good video, then go ahead and come in a little early before 6:40 and raise your hand. All you gotta do is raise your Zoom hand. We used to call it the digital hand, but we've moved to Zoom hand to go ahead and join the panelists, and you're more than welcome to do that. If you've got a question, you want to ask that question in the Q&A before you jump into the panel. You can definitely raise your hand later and ask those questions, but if you want to make sure you kind of save your place, we usually start with the questions that are in the Q&A. If you are a panelist, a couple things. One, make sure that you don't do anything with the Q&A, but once you're in the panel, don't answer questions or don't interact with those. It makes it difficult for me to manage those. So if you want to ask a new question, raise your Zoom hand as a panelist. If you want to talk about the current subject that we're talking about, then raise your physical hand. You might have to hold it a little bit while so that I can see it, and then I will come to you before I go to the other Zoom hands if we have time. I will change subjects occasionally just because we've talked about something long enough, and we don't always get to everyone, but we'll do the best we can. Also, if you are interested in, again, you can come as early as 6 a.m. It's very casual talk at 6. Oftentimes we have a second hour, and we do have a second hour today. We are going to be graced by the presence of product management from Elemental to talking about the Elemental link. So you're going to be able to get your questions answered and some of your answers questioned by the actual Elemental team managing the product. So they're going to be here 8 o'clock from 8 to 9. That'll be our second. We're not broadcasting that if you're watching that on YouTube, but we will have the whole group here and we'll be open to your Q&A. We're talking about audio IP in the second hour tomorrow on Wednesday. And on Thursday, we're going to talk about camera grids, distortion, lenses, all kinds of geeky stuff around how your lenses affect your footage. So that's coming up over this week. On Saturday, we're going to have a long Saturday. We always do. I'm going to be talking about understanding MEs at 9 a.m. At 10 a.m., we'll have Final Cut Pro Deep Cuts with Steve Bays and Mimo Live with Oliver Breidenbach. So a lot of us are learning that together, and we are going to go ahead and repost that link to everyone. So there's a couple people that have requested it, and It's not going to be quite a 90-day. It's going to end at the same time as everyone else's, but it will be available. So so we're going to post that out soon. So stay tuned for that. And then Nick Justishin is going to talk more about photogrammetry and kind of working in Unreal Engine at noon. And then at 1 o'clock, we're adding a bonus one. We're going to talk about the ATEM Mini at 1 o'clock. So so it's going to be a slightly longer day, just because we wanted to see if we could. So anyway, so that'll be coming up on Saturday. So Saturday's pretty busy. Also, there's a pretty rich Discord discussion going on. If you're watching this, and if you want to join Discord, you have to be here at 6:30, 30 minutes before we go live here. So by the time I start talking about it here, it's too late. You have to come back tomorrow early. So 6:30 is the time. We'll post a 30-minute Discord link that you can use to get into Discord. And there's a lot of great discussions kind of building there. We're going to keep on refining that as we go. So anyway, I think that's it. I am going to get started with the question and answer. So we've got one from Gabriel here. Gabriel from Malaysia. Hi. I said, I have Wirecast feeding a virtual cam to Zoom. What methods of redundancy would you put in place in case Wirecast OBS eCam crashes? And what measures do you put in place to increase machine stability, especially mission critical streams? So what I would say is that when we're kind of doing a virtual camera into Zoom, it's I wouldn't consider that. I wouldn't usually use it for a hugely mission critical stream. If you're definitely doing important streams, I think that making sure you've obviously got enough CPU power to manage it, making sure that you've tested it heavily to make sure that it works, and make sure that during your show you don't do anything that you didn't do in rehearsal are usually the certain things that I would do to reduce the number of variables that could happen there. But I wouldn't consider, for me, once I want to do a mission critical show, I would be using some kind of external switcher with something like a web presenter coming into it, just to make sure that there's nothing else it's thinking about. And we have to remember that Zoom, we're definitely we're using Zoom for more than it was designed for. so we just want to keep that in mind as we start to push down, when we're talking to folks. Does anyone have any other comments about that or any other questions?
Obviously, a backup webcam is a good thing to have on hand, or to know how to crash out of your virtual software so you can at least access the webcam again and know that you can hot fire that back into Zoom without any worries. But you are pushing a boundary when you're bringing those virtual cameras into production. I've done it on a regular basis and haven't had much difficulty, but then you're dealing with web traffic, and web traffic can definitely affect those webcams as well.
Yeah. So go ahead, Colin.
So a couple of points on redundancy. First, you don't want to have the Wirecast instance operate as your Zoom host, because if Wirecast dies, that connection dies, then your host bombs out of Zoom. That's bad. Two, you want some sort of warm spare. Have another computer with the same Wirecast document on it with all the assets so that you can swap it in if you need to. Big problem with Wirecast, and actually the problem with most of these switchers, is they don't have any sort of asset consolidation tool. I actually talked to Telestream about this at one point. They said this is not, and what I was going to do is I was going to parse the XML and rearrange the assets and organize them into a single folder. They said, this is not a supported workflow. Yes, I know, but that's the problem. It's not a supported workflow. They said, no, don't do it. I'm like, okay. So when you set up a document in Wirecast, the same thing really is with OBS or any of these other ones, is you want to make sure that your assets are organized on a disk, on the disk in a way that they're relatively portable relative to the XML document that represents your Wirecast document as a whole. So you can just drop them all into a single folder, move them from machine to machine, load them up on your warm spare, and have that available to you at the time.
Yeah, and definitely.
The other thing, of course, is sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Last time.
I was just going to touch on the other aspect of redundancy, of course, is you want to be streaming on to a CDN that offers you redundant RTM.
If you're not streaming, yeah, if
So
you're not
you
streaming from, I mean, I think that the question is whether he's feeding into Zoom, but it sounds like it's the Zoom meeting.
Right.
So
Zoom
there's
is
not any way to
probably
stream
handling
it.
that end of
Yeah.
it. But when you are doing that
Mhm.
outside of Zoom, the same thing applies. Make sure you're working with redundant endpoints and so on.
And
That's
Colin
our
has a
guy.
great point. Colin has a great point that you can have another computer join Zoom that's your backup that has all your assets that's already in Zoom. So if one dropped out, the other one can immediately be, if neither one is a host, if they're co-hosts or whatever, one could fall out and the other one theoretically in another region or something else, or if you lose internet. I mean, if you really want to talk about being redundant, you could probably figure out a way to put another one somewhere else so that someone else can jump in at least for a minute while you manage that. Michael Tucker.
We used to do that with Hangouts.
Yep.
We used
Yeah,
to do that
that's
a
what
lot.
I was realizing that when Colin was talking, I realized we used to jump into two people jump into a Hangout specifically so that we would be able to do that. And we would name them so that they'd be kind of next to each other, and one would have a logo, or sometimes we'd even try to match the color of the Hangout. But then they changed it to a point where the film strip was over top of the video, so which made it difficult. Anyway, so let's see here. So we're going to go on here. Rick Markley said, moving from photogrammetry, could we move into a conversation towards virtual production? Some topics could be game engines, Unreal, Unity, volumetric capture, deeper dive into LiDAR, performance capture, real-time remote, virtual production studios. I could help invite some great guests to join a specific topic. Yeah, absolutely. I think that Nick and I have been talking about adding more of that. So Nick's discussion on Saturday is the first step of that. But I definitely want to add more of that. I think it's important for all of us to see, because there's a lot of different things that these things can interact with. Even if we're doing broadcast, something like Unreal makes a lot of difference for broadcast graphics and so on and so forth. But there's also just going to be a huge amount of opportunities for us in the AR/VR/ interactive and immersive stuff that I think we should all keep our toe in. So we'll definitely be adding some more hours. And now that I know that Nick is really ready to go, I didn't want to start asking Nick to do more than he's ready for. But now that Nick is starting to be ready, and that you're asking, and Claudio and Jeff are talking about it, we now have enough people to take that on. So what we'll do is we'll start adding some stuff into Discord to start allowing that conversation to start up a little bit more. We have a photogrammetry one, but we'll start building that up. Admittedly, it was just something that I wasn't ready to take on myself. I feel like I've already got enough little balls in the air. So having some other folks in the community willing to take it on, we'll start handing it off to you guys. I'm really excited about doing that, and I'm looking forward to learning from you. So that'll be great. Rick Combs said, just wanted to comment on a suggestion that was made a couple weeks ago from Chris, I think. Everybody laughed at his comment about taking a hard drive that would not boot and spinning it on a table. I do computer repair and have this problem happen to me quite often. However, never have given this a try. Well, yesterday I had the option to do it, took the hard drive out of the computer that would not boot, spun it on the table and put it back in, and it booted. So kudos to Chris. Well,
I call it
Chris.
turtle spinning.
Oh my gosh.
It works. I swear it works.
So I do have one question about this technique. How much bounce is required in the spinning process? Because I imagine the bounce.
Always soft hands, but a
Soft
firm
hands.
spin.
Okay.
And then stop it.
As a rewind, we talked about drives a couple weeks ago, or maybe a week ago. Time is a spread here, but one of the things we just discussed is when a drive gets stuck, when its plates are stuck, it hasn't been turned on for too long. You can set it on a table, and Chris was talking about being able to set it on a table and spin it. And if you give it a good, now you don't want to set it down hard and you don't want to shake it, but you just want to spin it around. It can loosen, like a little bit of a firm spin. It can loosen the plates, loosen the platters, and allow you to. And this is
inertia is your friend.
Exactly. This is back where the old fogies before, and there's a whole bunch of people who have SSDs. They're going, I have no idea what he's talking about. Like, why would you spin an SSD around? But anyway.
You could also take them for a drive, like a 5-minute drive around a few streets, and sometimes that actually unsticks them. So that can work.
Is that like kind of like putting your children to sleep? When
Exactly.
they were little,
it
just like just driving around the block and then come back. Yeah,
Exactly,
it's,
Yeah, I've done that
Anyway.
just by hand holding it and spinning it and putting it back in, and I've gotten to spin up enough that I could strip
Yeah, it's so funny, because this discussion it does have a finite, length of time that we're going to be talking about it within the next couple of years. Like my kids, we finished watching something on Netflix, some series, and my son was like, when's the next series? And I'm like, oh, probably have to wait another year for the next series. He's like, what? And I said, you have no idea. I used to have to wait for a whole week between every episode. And he just thought that was the most insane thing he had ever heard. Like, he was just like, how could you even do that? How would you even could remember what was going on? And so anyway, Rick Markley said NDI released a new Mac version and it's working with Zoom again. How's it for everyone else? So this is how are you getting, I guess the question is, how is NDI going in the Mac version going into Zoom directly? How are we using it to pipe it in? Does it just show up? Hold on, let me, does anyone know?
Presumably it's NDI into a software switcher.
It's a virtual camera, virtual switcher.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm not clear of that. So maybe we can kind of talk a little bit more about that. I'm not clear of how the NDI gets in there past that. So the NDI working in Zoom, NDI has been working in Zoom, or has been working in the Mac version. Go ahead, Michael Tucker.
I was just looking at it before I downloaded it, and it looks like there's an access manager now, which allows outsourcing. So maybe it's going through there. That's something to play with. That's all.
Yeah, let's play with that. I haven't seen a direct connection from NDI to Zoom without some kind of switcher in the middle. So if that's actually the case, that's super interesting. So let's do some research on that.
It sounds like it's very much like the Red Dog tools in operation.
No, all that stuff makes sense. What it doesn't, getting the NDI into the Mac, we totally makes sense. The question is what's required from once it gets to the Mac to go into Zoom? How does it show up as a camera for Zoom? Because everything we've seen so far has been going into a software switcher like Mimo Live or Wirecast, and then into Zoom. So with the reference of this, I'm not clear what that means.
Alex, I think they've added the virtual input on the Mac as well. It wasn't there before. I'm just looking at the site right now, and in the new NDI tools, there's a virtual input in for Mac as well. It was only for Windows before.
Well, let's test it and check it out. That's a pretty cool. That could be really cool to do a lot of interesting things if you can have NDI going straight into Zoom. Claudio also asked before the connection was last. I was asking augmented reality solution for broadcast. Is there an augmented reality graphic solution for broadcast discussed in the future? And that's going to be, I think, where we're going to see augmented reality graphics and so on and so forth is going to be Unreal Engine. For the most part. I mean, Unity to some degree. And the reason that for anyone who's wondering why we're leaning towards Unreal Engine and against Unity is because we use 2997 in broadcast. That may not matter to everyone for a while, soon, but Unreal, to my knowledge, is really focused heavily on making sure that it's proper 2997 output from cards, and Unity just stuck with 30. And there's a lot of work to go from one to the other. So I don't expect Unity to do it ever. And so as a result, because I have to connect it to pieces of hardware, I lean more towards that. I do find that Unity is a little easier to come up to speed, but it's easier to get started quickly and then harder to keep going than Unreal, at least from our experience so far. So
just to elaborate, you had touched on this the other day, that one of them is more artist focused and one of them is more programmer focused in the UI. Which was which? In the development environment, I mean.
I guess what I would say is that Unity, when you first start, this is my impression. You guys anybody who's using the two can contrast this. My impression is that from an artist perspective, it's easier to get Unity off the ground and do something really quickly, but you more quickly have to start adding code step one is really easy, and then all the steps after that get harder than with Unreal. Unreal, I find that the first steps are harder, but then there's more training, there's more tools, there's more other things that we don't require coding, and it's 2997 compliant. So, right now, I think that the advantage is leaning towards Unreal at the moment. They also have this little game called Fortnite that's printing money.
Yeah. One of the problems I'm hearing from people developing on Unity is that they keep changing the flow and the way the thing's laid out and how you access features and how you program. It's like everything keeps changing with each new version, and they're getting fed up with it, really.
Yeah, I just think that Unreal's a lot more mature, as far as the development process, and so I think that we're kind of leaning that direction right now. Jesse M says, "Good morning. While running a live stream in Livestream Studio on a Mac, utilizing Skype coming in via NDI from a second Mac computer connected via Ethernet to the network. I was getting a variety of frame rate, quality, and some flashing and resizing. Is there a way to set Skype to stay in HD mode on the Mac? This would need to be done on both the remote guest and the local computers. I've read that Skype fluctuates between 15 and 30 frames a second. Thanks, Jesse." Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
With the live stream, there's...
Whoop, you muted yourself there. Michael Tucker. Go ahead, start again.
With the live stream studio, there's the ability to lock the frames, and so it actually does computational work underneath to actually delay it by 1 second, which is probably the easiest way of doing that one.
Oh, very good. I didn't know it did that. So it'll buffer it by a second, and then just make sure that the frames are coming out, and making sure that it's getting the frames at 30 frames a second.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's a good one. That's a good catch. Kenny Hampton said, "Alex, you just mentioned that 2997 may not matter soon. Please explain. Thanks." It's going to matter. When I say soon to me is like 10 years. But in 10 years, we're not going to be thinking about it. Eventually, we're going to realize we're going to go away from this horrible 2997, shenanigans, and just go to full frames. I mean, it's just this crazy. There's probably a whole hour there for us to talk about 2997, 5994. I'm not going to spend an hour talking about it, but right now we're mostly connected to 2997 over audio. Getting audio to sync up, and it's just this format that we have in there that we're keeping, and there's too much heavy hardware to keep it going, and we have to stick with it. But it's and it makes it really hard if you try to go to 30p right now in a standard production pipeline. So it stays there, but it's a little bit annoying. Sky?
Bill Gates was speaking to his people here at the UW, University of Washington, and he was fascinated that we were still interested in monitors at all. He made the offhand comment, "When are we going to just attach to the back of the retina?"
Yeah.
Anyway,
a little while.
There's a future.
No, absolutely. Chris?
Is it too late to do a deep dive on non-square pixels?
Yes, it is too late. See, that's a good example. We were stuck with non-square pixels for a long time, and now we don't have them anymore. And we don't really, the only time you have to think about non-square pixels is when you pull out an old DV tape or something where you're like, why is everything all squished together? So we do slowly work our way out of these things. Interlace,
Interlace.
Interlace
Those were dark days.
Dark
days.
Yeah. Interlace is another good one that we're starting to see work its way out. So Interlace has been something, but when you look at the trajectory, we were doing progressive 15 years ago, and it took that long for us to get to a point where we're no longer doing Interlace or not doing very much of it. So the problem is that you have to remember what's holding us in a lot of times is the fact that there's billions of dollars spent on hardware that support a certain construct. And so, and when I say billions, it's probably closer to trillions of dollars of hardware that is spent, all the broadcast stations, all the event companies, I think of everybody doing media there's certain formats that they're living inside of, and that hardware supports a certain group of things. And so you have to slowly kind of work your way through that system, you have to first make it available to everyone that we can do progressive and then do those things. And then we slowly kind of work our way, out of it over time by people making those choices. But it definitely takes a long time. It's definitely measured in a decade term, not a year term. Chris Summers? You're using the space bar, aren't you?
Hello. No, I wasn't at all. I promise. I swear to God. I'm flummoxed now. Yeah, going back to formats. Like I remember a long time, like 15, 20 years ago, people having a discussion about how, about aspect ratios, you know, and how there were so many different aspect ratios compared to different guidelines of NTSC and PAL. Then you had, you know, Technovision, you had widescreen, 239, 240, 4:3, 178 to 1, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just gotten worse now. Now we've got even more formats. You got like, you got 178, which is 16:9. Now people are shooting in 2:1, which is a completely new aspect ratio, which has come about in the past sort of less than 5 years, I think. And that's generally because of streaming. Then we've also got social media, which gives us
9:16,
9:16 and 1:1 and all its variations. So it's just interesting. It'd be great to standardize frame rates, but aspect ratios, that's just like going crazy, I think.
That's crazy talk. I don't think we'll see standardization of. And John Wigglesworth said it's time to do a deep dive into PAL 8 field sequence, CCAM 12 field sequence.
CCAM.
I think he's right. I think that we do need to do a deep dive on formats. I think a good 1 hour discussion and a second hour talking just about formats, whether it's PAL, CCAM, but that one's going to take some prep, so it's going to be a couple weeks out because I have to think about how to display it, and I'm probably going to talk to a couple of you around about how do we build something that we can show people, what that looks like. So yeah, let's keep that in the background, right? I like the idea. Go ahead, Chris Fenwick.
So I had a client come to me recently and said, hey, so I've been reading about 18:9 as an aspect ratio. And I said, well, for starters, that's 2:1, but what's your point?
Yeah, exactly.
And she said, and apparently somebody had started
it's like 16:9, but wider.
Yeah. Somebody had started a push, and basically it was based on like phone hardware. And I said to her, well, I think that's, you don't want to chase a phone by all means, because that'll just change next year, or Apple will make a round phone, and then you're going to say, what are we going to make round screens? But I advised her to say, no, let's just slow down. 16:9 is fine. And I thought it was a weird discussion.
So there's another reason that integers are easier to work with, rather than 16:9 and 2:1 that we ran into when we started doing LED walls, is that LED walls, it's really nice if the LED walls are just 2:1. If you know that that you're 2x across and 1x down, it means that you can do 8x4. But
sure.
We end up having, the reason is you end up with discussions with your client about why they typically what'll happen is why they have an extra row at the bottom of their, that they're paying for. They're paying a lot of money per unit. Why they have an extra row across the bottom when you're cutting some of it off because you're 16:9, and the only way they could fit it into that whatever is to have it not, be that. We're not using all of their all the pixels they paid for. No, but I'm saying, but yes. that's I know that's affecting our production pipeline is the issue where that we, you have to think about what people are watching it on, and what people are, and what the masses, in the end, we can make whatever we want, but the end product, like I really didn't take 9:16 very seriously. Every time a client came up and said, we're really thinking about 9:16. I was like, really? Are you really thinking about that? Because if you thought about it, I don't think you'd want to do it. And that was kind of my standard reaction to 9:16. And then, after 10, 15 hours of after 10 or 15 hours of watching TikTok, I kind of got it. That I'm sitting there watching fast things close together. I don't want to keep on doing this because the interface works this way. The interface works up and down, and I'm moving it so quickly that it doesn't make sense. And I realized that even I had gotten to a point where someone would take their YouTube video and post it into TikTok, and I would immediately just go, but I don't care what it is. I'm like, I'm not interested because it's all black. It's all black on either side. And even one by one with Instagram, people repost their Instagram to TikTok, and one by one, if you watch a lot of TikTok, you're like, they're just reposting, and then you pass it. Like you go, no, I don't want to watch that because they're not building it, for the platform, and so it's old content, right? And so it is. So when you think about that, and that doesn't matter It was cute until there's 2 billion people that have downloaded TikTok, which is now, and now you have to think about that. Almost a third of the world is looking at 9:16, and you have to kind of think about it. Sky, go ahead.
Well, and that's my point. We used to be beholding to Sony, and then we were paying a subscription by buying the tape stock. And now that we've gone to Moore's Law and the 18 months concept, and you just proved my point that if it's all about eyeballs, if it's all about the numbers, that these formats of size are changing much more quickly. And I guess my question is, the overlay I want to ask you, Alex, is I've been told that even Moore's Law is now 2 years old and out of date. So we've gone from 18
I think
months.
I think the other thing though is like, I think Quibi's kind of gone down the right path there, and I really haven't spent much time looking at it yet. So you guys will have to tell me if you've watched it or, I keep on meaning to download it and then I just don't get around to it. And but Quibi is they're that new short format platform that was launched with $1 billion or whatever, and I haven't seen anything show up from them that I felt like I had to watch, and I think that's their problem. But
well,
has anyone downloaded it? Has anyone downloaded it?
Content is king.
It's not. It's not. Nope.
What?
Community is king. Content is the honeypot. No, but that I promise you that's the case. Community is king. Community's always been king, and content just brings people to the community. And if you don't, people get caught up with the content. But if you look at like TikTok, what's there as a community? It's not, it's them riffing off of each other. It's not the content itself. It's the fact that they're interacting with each other. When we go to see when someone goes to see their favorite band, they're part of their tribe that are all going to watch that band together. There's 70,000 of them, and so that's what they're excited about,
Chris, you're writing this down, right? Chris, finish. You're writing this down.
But there's a unified experience that the content creates, and that unified experience generates a community. But I will argue strongly that content is not king. Content makers say that, and that's a good. It's like a diamond is forever. The diamonds aren't worth anything. They're just a marketing thing. There's a beach in Namibia that you're not allowed to go on because you could just scoop up your hand and grab enough diamonds to pay off your house. And so it's all glass, essentially, except for the fact that it's heavily controlled. And so we're told that content is king. But if you realize what the value of that content is, it's that we're talking about it we're talking about it at lunch, we're talking about it there, we're tweeting about it, we're doing all those things. It creates a contextual connection for community. So anyway, that's that's a whole another conversation there. But what I will say about where were we? Oh, we're talking about Quibi that we went off. But what's interesting about what they're doing is they're doing multi-format at the same time. So when they're doing 16:9 and 9:16 at the same time, and then they're kind of saving the best frame in metadata, I believe in metadata, to make sure that if you watch it in 9:16, you get a 9:16 experience. If you watch it at 16:9, you get a 16:9 experience. So you can kind of do both. And thinking about that, thinking about that framing is mind-numbing, because I've had to, not for Quibi, but I've had to think about that hard. And thinking about how you tell a story in different ways, because what a lot of people do is they just do center cut. Like they're just going to do a center cut for the 9:16. But what really works is animating that frame to basically grab what makes sense in that 9. And some of it's not going to work in 9:16, and some of it's not going to work in 16:9. But for the most part, you average that out. Alex.
I've been actually making plugins for the BBC for Final Cut, so they're doing their Quibi news show.
Oh yeah.
So what that means is that they edit the whole news show, which is 7 or 8 minutes every day, and they do it at 9:16 first, and then they copy that timeline over to 16:9 timeline, and all my plugins reframe everything automatically. That's what I'm kind of bringing to the program. And then there's the editors, they choose to reframe a little bit more, including all the graphics move and stuff like that. Right. So that's what Quibi does. So effectively, they are just two separate streams.
How does it save? So it's not one stream that's just it's two different streams that it's switching back and forth between when you turn it?
Yes, it is. That's what it's doing, yeah. So
that's
I mean,
really
what
inefficient. Like, that's horribly inefficient.
Yeah.
Like, it seems like it would be better to have a metadata stream that just said, this is what you should do with the same frames that I'm sending you, but evidently it's not doing that.
Well, I mean, obviously what it should be is a cloud of media objects with the metadata to say this media object should be shown in this way, whatever aspect ratio that you're looking at, whether it's be 20 by 1 or 1 by 20. And what you're sending people, the idea of frame rates will hopefully be old-fashioned, because essentially what we're doing is we're going to move the compositor from where the editor has composited and rendered out a big blob of media. The compositor will actually go to where the user is, and then the user will have a compositor in their device, and it will play every object at whatever frame rate it would normally play at whatever aspect ratio it should be. And I take my glasses off, and all the types should get bigger because metadata tells me that I need the text to be bigger because my eyesight isn't very good. So essentially,
am I correct?
Media objects, so there's no frame rate problems.
Let's stick with hands. We've got a couple, Colin, we've got a couple hands up. Orlando, go ahead.
Yeah, I've watched a couple of the Quibi programs. What's interesting, it is, as Alex mentioned, it is two masters, but it's so much up to the editor. I mean, when you flip back and forth on some of the programming, you're like, oh wow, that's different information, and it's not what I expected. And then on some other things, it just feels like it's just a quick reframe. So I think it's far more complicated. And then you wonder as a user, are you going to be flipping back and forth? Is it just kind of a novelty at first, or a convenience if you move around a little bit? I wonder that, because at first you definitely flip around just to check it out. But I think as you start watching, you end up kind of settling on one or the other for the most part.
Right. Colin?
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out, having not studied Quibi that closely. So the fleshy content is center cut, and then everything else is the overlays are added according to what aspect ratio you have. I mean, you're actually taking only one shot of the
I don't know if there's that much graphics.
Even if you're doing it with two cameras, right?
No, I mean, in the case of this new show, they get their footage and they are doing an edit in 9:16. And then they copy that whole timeline, and they could put whatever they want in that 16:9 version. That could be quite different with totally different stuff and different audio.
I mean,
they
you
could
can't
have two
refer
separate
to editorial content on the fringe of one frame that wouldn't show up in the other orientation. Is my point.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's editors making choices about what the focus of the shot is and how to reframe it correctly. So sometimes they have a split screen in the vertical because you just can't fit it in. So that you get a close-up in one top half of the frame and then the wide in the bottom part of the frame. But you don't need to do that. And also vice versa, because sometimes you get vertical footage that looks fine in vertical show, but doesn't look so good in the horizontal.
Sure.
Do they tape off do you know if they tape off their viewfinders? So they kind of protect for 9:16?
Yeah, I
saw.
think
they do a common top. It's a kind of common top. So what happens is that say that they shoot in 4K, so they don't have to worry about resolution loss, because then they end up with HD. And essentially they have the 16:9 kind of frame inside the 4K about this height, which means that so your eye line is actually quite good, because you want a little bit more headroom in the 9:16 than you would in the 16:9. So it's close to a common top, but not quite. So it's a slightly raised up 16:9 cutout of a 4K shot.
Which, by the way, for those of you who are thinking about why would I need an 8K camera or a 6K camera, this is a really good reason. If you want to go to 4K, like for this, having an 8K camera that you can slide 4K. Around. It's we all think it's funny, but it's gonna be coming soon. Go ahead, Sky. You were gonna say something, and then Chris.
Well, I guess my question is regarding the ability to keep a question long enough to be able to ask it when you're called on. I'll be back. Sorry, went away.
No worries, Chris Summers.
As I understand it, reiterating what was said now, they shoot it once on a large format sensor, and their frame lines, they have custom frame lines. Again, custom aspects. Now we're going back to, it's not even square. Now we're shooting with 9:16 and 16:9 at once. And it's almost like a crucifix. It sits at the top with and the 9:16 sits just like a little bit above, just to kind of give it some compensation. But then as a DP or an operator, you're constantly having to make a decision in like dramatically, where do you put that frame now? At the same time, and like Orlando was saying, as a viewer, I have not watched Quibi as a viewer, but and I will post articles in Discord from the cinematographers who have shot it and the cinematography process. I will post those, but as a viewer, it must be confusing because you must be going like, well, you're missing out on something somewhere. At some point, you're either sacrificing some information at the bottom to give you a certain mood. I don't understand this platform.
I think that action, the action sequences are the hardest. I did a test with my kids. My kids and I have a TikTok. So we haven't posted to it recently because, of course, I got a job and got really busy, and suddenly everyone had to. Suddenly, everybody wanted to do virtual events. So it's been dry for a couple months, but we have this little thing called the McDubbies on TikTok, and it's also on YouTube. And you only see one video on YouTube. But what that was is an experiment. That one image or that one video was an experiment of I shot the whole thing with a Blackmagic 6K. So I shot them just doing one of the typical TikToks where they're mouthing the words and everything else, and but it shot it in 16:9 and then cut it in Final Cut and then cut it. I did 16:9 and then cut it to, reformatted it for 9:16. You could go either way, and I did find that both of them worked, but it was a simple discussion back and forth. And I did like the 16:9 better because you could do nose room and that type of things a little bit more effectively. But I did find it harder, even on a simple discussion between two people with two over-the-shoulder cameras. I found that to be much harder to think about than I thought it was going to be. It was a simple thing, and then when I started doing it, because I would have given them a lot more nose room, and I was going to include other things behind them, and suddenly I just realized that none of that worked. And so the one thing I can say is that it's worth us as a group trying it, and trying to produce some stuff that's going. And for me, I'm using TikTok and YouTube because it's two easy formats to make that work. But it's a very fascinating problem, and I think that it's worth our time as media creators to experiment with it because it's going to keep coming. Sky?
Well, I realized Minecraft has kind of opened up and lowered the barrier to entry of a participant versus just an observer. And to us as creators or media creators, the playing field has been just blown open, and it's no longer $100,000 to get up to the table and play the game. So I guess my question of the conversation of that participant, I remember an Autodesk before it was bought, Discrete, before it was bought by Autodesk, a guy says, we don't want interactive because humans are too lazy. They just want to observe.
Which is totally wrong. Bring it. Humans desperately want to interact. They desperately want to be part of the conversation. They desperately, we talked about this. I've talked about this a couple of times when we thought we had this bright idea to hook a Arduino controller to a flamethrower and then let the audience vote on when it goes off. There was kind of this slow interaction as they were playing with it, and then as soon as the flamethrower went off the first time, there was everyone went crazy, because they suddenly realized, oh, I get to play. They thought they were just doing something fun, and they were like, oh, this is fine. And then as soon as they realized that they were part of it, and if you look at as a football fan, the only sport I really watch is Steelers. And I don't even watch football. I just watch the Steelers. So, but as a Steeler fan, you go to the game to be part of the game. You're not going to the game to watch the game from a stadium, because my parents have season tickets that are up in the nosebleeds, and it's not a great experience. I'd much rather be at home watching it, it's from a visual perspective. But you go because you get to be part of the game. You get to make it harder for the other team to get their job done. And that you're part of that interaction, and people want to be part of that interaction. And when we see people, when everything we've seen over the last decade of interacting with people is you light up the audience and you get them to go do something, with you, you get them to interact, you answer their questions. If you look at what we're doing here, there's no production value. I'm sitting in front of a still camera, having a conversation with everybody, and our average view time, if this was a YouTube production or Facebook production, they'd be writing a case study about this, for the number of people that are coming every day and sitting for 3 hours, because we're interacting. We're having a conversation.
Without getting political, where is the social comment about Arab Spring?
Well, that's a much more complicated thing that we'll talk about at some point. It wasn't as socially driven as one would think.
It's interactive though. And
it was. I'll just say one thing about Arab Spring and then I'll move on. What made Arab Spring was Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera was creating a feedback loop, and what caused that was the fact that that Egypt didn't have very good infrastructure, and so everybody has their own satellite dish. And because everyone had their own satellite dish, when they cut them off, they couldn't, and everyone was still watching it. And when people realized that it was safe, I mean, not safe, but there was a lot of people doing it. It created a feedback loop, but it was much less Twitter and Facebook than it was. In the social sphere, it was popular to say that, but that was really still driven by a TV network, and not necessarily intentionally, just they were covering it. Michael Tucker?
Alex, I just want to swap subjects for a minute. I got an email from Pixelot, which do a 180 VR camera.
And just I'm just going to back up 1 second. We'll jump to you here in a second.
Okay.
But I just want to remind people that when you want to change subjects, put up a Zoom hand. When you want to talk about the same subject, put up your physical hand. Physical hands are telling me that you're new, you're new to our little community. But when you put up your physical hand, it means that we're still talking about the same thing. We're ready to change subjects. I'm just letting everybody know. Make sure to raise your Zoom hand when you want to change subjects. Anyway, go ahead, Michael.
I was raising my Zoom hand, so that's
I didn't see it.
Good.
I didn't see it. Oh, okay, yeah.
I'm raising my hand. Yeah.
All right.
I just got an email from Pixelot. Now they make an automated broadcast system for sports mainly, and it uses 4K cameras to make an 8K image across it and some AR tracking. So I just wondered if anyone's been involved with doing that sort of thing. I know that you did some stuff with 180 a while ago in VR, Alex. So it was just a question to throw out and see what's going with it.
Can you repeat the process again?
And the process, from what I understand, is they've got a static image of 180 degrees on a side of a field. It could be a soccer field. It could be like a football field, basketball. What else do they have? Ice hockey, that sort of thing. So it actually is a static image. And then they're using AR, like augmented reality, to actually track the actual gameplay. It's quite interesting stuff. And then you can go and pick the shots, put all the layered shots over the top of it.
I think that what we've the hard part with a lot of the 8K to 4K and 8K to 2K and a lot of those things for me has been that what really works a lot of times is changing the angle of where the camera was to tell us more about the sport that I'm watching. And so it seems efficient. Sometimes I feel like it's a solution looking for a problem. Is that I get it, but a lot of times what makes and again, I think I come from American football, which has an incredible amount of budget, where we have there's incredible number of cameras that are involved with that, and we're used to kind of jumping around a lot. And I noticed that in most soccer games, when I look at it, it's harder to cover. There's not as many cameras. There's not as this, and I think that there should be the same budget, but I don't feel like we get the same level of production.
It's not geared at budget though. Perhaps it's geared at the local grounds where someone's actually learning. Like, I think I've seen that too.
I think it's also harder to cover soccer because it moves around. American football tends to make itself really useful for TV production. I think it was just a happy marriage because they're all stopping and they're all in the same place. And so all your camera, and they're all going to do something that's predictable. And so all the cameras are able to kind of focus in on that. And I think that that's an advantage that American football has from a purely entertainment perspective, is that it gives you time. It gives you time to comment. It gives you time to, like there's all these things that it happens to do that wasn't what it intended to do. It just happened to be in the kind of the right place at the right time. Stephen Kimbrough?
Yeah, one of the things that seems to be happening with Golden State, they installed a 50-foot slider for the high and wide basketball shot.
Right.
And I guess then you've got the instance like Flycam over the top too. So you're actually over the top of it when you're looking at it from a vision perspective, which is something different.
Yeah,
there's a drone.
Yeah. So it's a lot of.
It's on a grid. It's on a wired grid in the stadiums. They physically hook it up to a grid.
Yeah, there's two basically four wires that pull it through with little pulley systems for the fly cam, and you have two operators, one that's positioned I sat next to them on one game. There's two operators that have one's controlling the position of the camera and the other one's controlling the pan, tilt, zoom of the camera. And what's amazing is watching these two guys that work together all the time. They're calling out their own plays. Like, hey, we're going to do this, and they have a term for it about what they're going to do, or that we're going to do this wide swing, and and so they work together as this team, and they definitely keep those teams pretty close together. I mean, I don't. Every time I've seen them, it's the same. I mean, the same people have been working together for years, on these games, because it's just really, it's very, very hard. I don't even know how they train people to do that, other than let them watch for a while and then let them work on college games or something, and then move up. But it's an incredible, that for some reason the fly cam to me just seems like one of the most complex processes that I've watched, personally watched someone kind of, and you don't think about it when you watch it. You mostly think about, wow, they got it caught in the shot. They didn't do the, they didn't quite get out of there in time. But when you actually watch them do it, and hear them talking back and forth to each other, and they're pretty sensitive if you talk too loud around them, just in case you're wondering, especially if you have a large booming voice, because they're doing something pretty, they're doing some pretty hard surgery there. So, any other questions? We're running towards the end of our hour. Is anything burning for people who are there? We've somehow gotten to the end of it. One thing that I wanted to add before we go into the next hour, given that we have a moment here, question that I'm thinking about for Discord is if we should break into smaller sections. So I've been thinking about, we have like an audio thing, but now that there's so many audio conversations, or a video thing, there's so many video conversations, it seems like subdividing it and creating an audio section that you can roll down, up and down, and then a video section that you roll up and down, and a 3D section that you roll up and down. Does that make sense for people? Does that make it too heavy? Or I think that the more granularity will help to some degree, as far as, I didn't want to start with a ton of subjects, but if people think that's a good idea, then I should have put a poll up while I did that. Yeah, go ahead, Tucker.
Yeah, typically I really like the thought behind the granularity and going through and making it very precise about this topic is about audio, this software, this thing. But it kind of, I think it hurts the general. It makes it so that you're, beyond about 6 different things I'm interested in. It's going to make me turn me off from going in deep and looking at every single one.
Right. I think that the hard part is the subjects are changing in the middle of the conversations, because people are adding stuff to it, and so that's the thing that I'm kind of pondering there. So I think that adding. Now, and you're saying like 6 different audio subjects or 6 overall subjects?
Just kind of topics I'm interested in. Once I get beyond a certain number, it's kind of like, well, okay. It goes from being something I'm like, I'm going to check that kind of all the time and make sure I'm up to date on it, to like, kind of see where it goes. The people that I've been talking to, we kind of, once it starts to get separated, we just take it offline, take it somewhere else, take it into a private chat, which seems to be working, but.
It kind of works, except that we're trying to keep it, like the goal of that to some degree is to have us to have the conversation. But I'm not going to do it very fast. I'm just letting people know that we're going to probably add a couple more sections there of the things that are the most popular. It's not like I'm going to add 40 new things. It's just going to be like, hey, let's break this one out because we're talking a lot about it, or hey, let's break this out, and we'll let it kind of very organically, separate itself out, and just see if it makes any difference, in that process. It's something I don't want to. I know that can get overwhelming if we just get way too many subjects, and so I'm trying to kind of balance that with the fact that one version of that isn't quite enough, but like grouping, having like live video and then video might make sense, because live video can be Memo Live, and it can be all the different Wirecast, some of those discussions can be broken up a little bit into that process. So
I'm kind of reminded of that cork board outside the grocery store in a small community that you would pin stuff up to. And the metaphor, sometimes it get messy and sometimes it didn't. And sometimes somebody would clean it up. And
Well, but it'd be like what I'm thinking about right now is just giving the corkboard some like putting some sections on the corkboard that say, in this 1/8 of the corkboard, we're going to put all the stuff in here. So it's just adding a little bit more, like just a little bit more structure to it, to the conversation. And I was a little bit like not sure. I didn't know how the Discord would work. I knew that we wanted to go that direction, but I wasn't sure exactly whether, how people would take to it. But people have taken to it pretty intensely. So, and it's been pretty useful. I think there's a lot of great conversations popping up there. So I want to kind of, play with, kind of building that out. Let's see here. And I'm going to, you'll see some folks as we get to the bottom of the hour here, you'll see a couple folks popping in here. Hold on. Let's see here. Promote.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going, Kevin?
Good, except I haven't followed your cool naming convention here. Let me fix that. There we go.
Alex, you're still on YouTube, okay? Just letting you know.
Yep. We haven't. We're gonna go ahead and if you can hand me back, or Chris, you can just end the stream at this point.